The Asian tsunami of 2004 devastated the countries around the Indian Ocean. 250,000 people died, and nearly 2 million were displaced as the ocean swallowed up their homes and their livelihoods. But one group survived relatively unscathed: the Moken, or sea nomads that live along the Andaman coast.
They even have the oral history about tsunami that saved them, from tsunami, because they know the signal, they know the warning in the sea.
The next decade would be a much greater test, however, as the people who once ruled the coastlines of Myanmar, Thailand and Malaysia were forced off their land and out of their homes.
Today they have become really marginalized, and even though they've been here before the other groups or used marine resources before, the rights, the land rights and then the natural resource, the use rights are not there.
The islands of Surin are an untouched paradise. Crystal blue waters, soft golden sand, and home to Salama Klatele and the last true Moken community. Now over 70, he wants to pass on the traditions of the Moken sea nomads to a younger generation. Originally from southern China, the Moken are thought to have migrated to the islands off the Andaman coast 4,000 years ago. Their culture emphasizes living in harmony with the sea and careful management of its resources. They lived on boats called kabang and historically shunned material possessions. But fishing, the foundation of their culture and livelihood, is now forbidden. The Department of National Parks have made the islands an environmental reservation. All fishing is banned. Good news for the aquatic environment, but a disaster for the Moken's only source of livelihood. The 5-kilometer limit is nothing for an engine-driven trawler, but out of reach if you're paddling a wooden canoe. Now they're forced to rely on the kindness of passing trawlers, like this industrial-sized fishing vessel. Sometimes they barter, but often the seamen take pity on the nomads and throw down a few fish, recognizing that these waters used to be theirs. When Salama was younger, the Moken ruled these waters, scattered amongst 800 islands off the coast of Myanmar, Thailand and Malaysia. Now they're confined to one tiny bay on Surin, under the jurisdiction of Thailand's National Parks Department, who control management of the island as a national park. Their nomadic traditions meant that during the dry season, they'd travel to different floating communities up and down the coast. In the monsoon, they'd tie their boats together and shelter on one of the islands. But that has all changed. Many of the traditional boats were lost in the tsunami, and their fleet was never rebuilt. This was the last Moken boat ever to be built over 10 years ago. Now the Parks Department has banned the cutting of timber, making boat building impossible. The only way the Moken community can survive is by selling trinkets and handicrafts to passing tourists.
ได้แล้วใช่ไหม
Phuket and the Andaman coastline welcome more than 20 million visitors a year, but the resorts and businesses that cater to the tourists' needs have little interest in the indigenous people of the coast or their way of life. Jen and his wife Yon, who belong to the Arak Lawoi tribe, are still able to eke out a living from crab fishing. They long since abandoned the nomadic life for a small hut on the coast of Krabi, and their community has shrunk as the younger generation went to work in the tourist business.
หมากูดอนวันนั้นมันยายไปโยคังควายลันตามั่งควายภูเก็ตมั่งราเวยอันนั้นก็แยกมาไม่มีนี่ตรงกลางหนองนี่หลังโรงเรียนนี่เลยเขามาทำในร้ายนี่เขามาทำบางกันลูกทำมาชีพของอีกนี่วะบายว่ามันปลดเผยวะไม่มัว
Their dwindling community is one that Dr. Narimon, an anthropologist from Bangkok, has spent decades studying, and she's seen the impact tourism has had on the locals.
Of course, you know, indigenous people, when they want to fish, when they want to moor their boat, the activities are limited by, you know, tour companies and resorts and hotels.
Although they're more integrated into life on the mainland, getting by is hard and poverty widespread.
I think the critical problem for them is land right, and I think the second one is the right to make a livelihood along the coastal area and the marine shore.
Ironically, for a people with a nomadic tradition, the greatest threat to the sea gypsy communities is having what little land they have taken away. Much of the coastal land is prized real estate, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and the property developers have little interest in protecting native communities. This community of Challeng sea gypsies on Rawai Beach in Phuket found themselves under attack earlier this year when a group of 100 men tried to close off the access road to their land and their ancestral burial grounds.
27 ตอนเช้านี่ก็คือเขาก็เริ่มมีกลุ่มชายชะกันแล้วก็นำรถแมคโครรถ6 ล้อมาบอกถ้าชาวบ้านขัดขวางก็จะตีซึ่งชาวบ้านก็โดนตีไปหลายคนเท่านั้นนะครับบาดเจ็บไปหลายคน
Several villagers were hospitalized, although the identity of their attackers remained concealed.
ชาวบ้านก็ไม่รู้จักว่ามาจากไหนนะครับก็อาจจะเป็นกลุ่มที่กลุ่มทุนอาจจะพามาเองอันนี้เราก็ไม่รู้จัก
After several hours, the army arrived to break up the clashes, and the intruders were dispersed. But the villagers know it's only a temporary reprieve. The property developers are well connected, and they can afford to drag the fight through the courts for years. The sea gypsies are trying to fight back and ensure their culture survives. This is the 6th annual Sea People Summit, a festival to celebrate the customs and traditions of the nomads. There are young faces in the crowd, but not many. Most have gone to the big towns and cities.
I mean, the young generations, they don't have knowledge, and that's why they don't really appreciate what they have.
The dances and rituals are some of the last remnants of a culture that dominated the Andaman coast, but also knew how to manage it as a sustainable resource. Now, aside from tourism, many areas here are overfished and polluted.
In their daily life, you know, spiritual component is really significant, and this translates to respect to environment.
Traditionally, the Moken have shied away from modern technology and integration, perhaps in the hope their isolation would preserve their way of life. But the modern world has caught up, and the future is bleak.
ปัญหาเยอะแต่ว่าจะขอป่าไม้ก็ไม่ให้ทำเราอยากจะอยู่แบบนี้เลยชีวิตเดิมเวลาเอาต้องลำแข็งใช่ไหมคือหยาบๆแล้วก็บางทีเรากิน
The Andaman coast is a place of unique beauty that attracts millions of visitors every year. But the presence of the indigenous people who thrived here for centuries has all but been washed away. For Assignment Asia, I'm Cheng, on the west coast of Thailand.